Okay, so I know not all of you guys have finished the questions, but I'm gonna start going over them. So let me share my screen with you guys. Okay, you guys can see that, right? Okay. Yeah, okay, so basically, we're just creating a simple student class with just name and test scores as the instance variables, right? So what we want to do first is just create or initialize the instance variables. So first we have and then we have to import list in order to use this. Good, okay. And the first thing we want to do is create a constructor. So we have public initialize. We have and array list s as our parameter. And all we have to do is name equals n. And in order to initialize our test scores, what do we have to do? Can you guys tell me what we should do in order to initialize our test scores? Right. Well, normally if we have like integer or string like this, we would just have it this dot name equals n. But when we have an array or array list, we don't want to just do this. Actually creates a shallow copy. So what we want to do is what we want to do instead of that. Right, correct. So Amanda said we would create a new variable with the length of s and then loop and then copy every single value. That is correct, but in this situation we actually have an array list instead of an array. So we're basically doing the same thing but with array list. So what we can do is test scores equals new array list of double regular for loop. Now have array list. Do you guys know what we want to use to get the length of this array list? Good. So make sure you know the difference between dot length, dot size, and dot length, the method parentheses. So like for example, if you have an array, you use dot length. And then if you have array list, you use dot. And if you have a string, you use dot length. these are differences. We want to use that as size. And then yeah, this is a syntax. Different from arrays. Make sure you know the methods. This use the dot add method to add to your array list, and then in order to get a certain value at a certain index, you just do s.getI. So if this was an array, you would basically so this is one way you can copy it over using this loop. So we have our type, and then we give it a name, D, S, and basically this loop, what this does is it looks at every single element in S and assigns a value to D. So all you have to do is these are the same loop, it's just different syntax. You can use either of them. The AP exam, doesn't matter. So that is our constructor. And now we want to have our regular getters and setters for the instance variables. So our name will be just, and then same thing for setters are correct. So these should be pretty simple. Any questions up to this point? All right, let's move on. So same thing, setters. Now we want to make sure that our return type is void because a new value, we're updating our instance variable to value. Scores, new score or new set of scores. And then same exact thing for this one. We don't want to just have this thing as a constructor, or same reasons as the constructor. We want to loop through this entire thing, and so this actually syntax thing you can use for setting numbers or setting elements in your array list. So if you look above here, we're just adding to the end of the list, but there's another method called set where you can specify an end, like an exact specific index number, and then you can set that index to whatever you pass into the second parameter. So these two are doing the same thing, but technically these two are different methods because this one just adds a new element to the ends of the list, and this one is basically setting an element at a certain index. But in this case, they're doing the same thing. Any questions on these methods? All right, so let's get started with our actual method. So was public string. And basically what you have to do is you can use dot split method, which basically breaks up our string into different elements in the array. So if you pass in like dot split space, this would turn this into like an array of first. The AP test doesn't test you for dot split method. So another way you can do is basically you can use, or let me just ask you guys, what would you guys use in this case? Hold on, let me check. I'm actually not exactly sure if you can use the split method and if they would take off points. I don't think they would take off points for using that.
Yeah, I don't think that they would take off points for using that. It's just a method that you don't have to know. But if you do use it, I think it's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Hannah. So, yeah, what you would want to do is you can find the index of a space, or index of a character, I guess. But in this case, we're looking for the space because we want to extract just the first name. And we can as our space index. And then once we find that, we can you guys guess the parameters of this? What would I put in there? We want to subtract or extract the first name only. Good. So we're gonna start looking at our string from index 0 up to space index. Now the second method, get last name, is basically the same. We have different parameters. Can you guys also guess the parameter you would put in for this one? We want just the last name. Yeah, so basically we want to start looking, or we want to extract the characters starting after the space. And since we know the space index, we want to start fun. But if you look at this carefully, there are two different methods actually, because you can have one with two parameters like this where you indicate the starting and the ending letter. But there's also the version with just one parameter where you can put in the starting point and then it extracts all the strings up to the last one. So technically you can put in name.length here, but you don't have to. If you just indicate the starting one, this just takes everything else out of the string. Okay, good. Now let's move on to get average. So this one should be pretty simple. What you want to do is you just want to sum up all the scores in your array list and then you just divide that by the size. So variable, and then let me use this other one. All you have to do is I'm adding all the numbers or the digits to the sum, and then at the end by test scores almost row length. Does this make sense to everyone? Okay, then I'm gonna pass it over to Hannah and she will go over the rest of the methods with you guys.
All right, so I'm gonna pick up where 7 left off. Let me share my screen with you guys. Can you guys see my eclipse? Okay, great. So the next method that you guys had to write was one to add a new test score to the list. So I'm just gonna write that signature in. So public void add test score, double score. Okay, so this method was a fairly simple one. All you really have to do for this one is add a new test score, so this parameter, to your test scores array list. So Java has a built-in array list method to do this. So we're just going to say test scores dot add score. And that will do it for us. And then the next method we had to write was to delete a test score. And the same thing for this one. Java also has a built-in ArrayList method to delete an item from the list. So to use that. Oops, sorry, not delete, remove. All right, so those two methods were pretty simple. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so Shia asked, how would you add a test score for an array? Would you duplicate the array? Yep, so if you were to do it using an array, you would need to have a variable to keep track of how many items are currently in the array, since for an array, you would have to set the size at the beginning. And so yes, you would run into an issue if you have more test scores than the number of items that you originally allocated the array to hold, then you would need to copy over all of those elements into a bigger array. And so normally how you would do that is you would have an array that is double the size of your original array, and you would just copy all of the elements from the original array into that new array, but it would have double the space. So then you could keep adding more elements on after that. And then if that array ran out of space, then you would do the same thing again. Does that make sense? So Lindsay, if we had a array list that was holding up, well, actually, you might be right. Okay, because why I originally didn't do that, so Java has two different remove methods for an array list. The first one is removing an index, and the second one is removing a object. And so doubles are kind of a special object since they represent primitive doubles. So I was thinking that you could probably, since it's representing a primitive, you could probably just pass in the score, but you might actually be right. I probably should have checked that to see if that would work. Okay, we can, after we finish going over this, we can write a main method to test out whether or not this works, because you bring up a good point. But besides those two questions, does this make sense to everyone? Is my screen not being shared? You guys should see Eclipse open.
I can see your screen.
Okay. Okay, great. So the next method that we had to write was a report card method that printed out some information from the student. So we're just going to put in that signature, public void report card. Okay, and so the first information that we needed to print out was the first name of the student. So, first name. And then for this part, can you guys think of a way that we can reuse the code that we've already written instead of writing entirely new code to find the first name of the student? Yeah, so we would want to use our get first name method that we had already written up here. We wouldn't want to use get full name, since all we want to know for this part is the first name of the student. And so this is something that the AP test likes to do a lot, is they like to have you reuse code that you've already written. And that is just a good coding practice in general, that if you have to do the same thing more than once, you don't want to have to retype code that you already have. So we're going to use the get first name method here. Take this get first name. And that is going to do the trick for us. And then the next thing that we want to know is the average test score. And this is a method that we have also already written, get average test score. To reuse that. And then the last are the minimum and maximum test scores of the student. And then we also want to know the maximum score. Okay, and so these two things we don't already have code for. And so what we're going to do is we're going to write two helper methods to find the maximum and minimum score. If you wanted to, you could find these things within the report card method. But once again, a good coding practice is to write helper methods so that if you ever go back to this code and you want to find the minimum score or the maximum score somewhere else other than in this report card method, you could easily do that using the helper method. So since it's a helper method, we're going to make it private, since we only want to use it within this class. So we're going to have private void, and I'm just going to call it get. And then we're going to have a private, and it won't be void because we want to return our minimum score. So it's going to be a double, and then private double get max. Does that make sense to everyone, why I decided to write two helper methods? Okay, cool. So to get the minimum score, I'm going to have a variable that holds our current minimum. So I'll just call it double min. And we said in the description of our class that the maximum score is going to be 100. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set our minimum score to 101 because we know that every item in our test scores array list is going to be less than this. So then what we're going to do is we're going to have a for each loop. So I'm going to say double D, actually we'll just say going to go through all the test scores in the list, and then we're going to say if the current score that we're on is less than min, then we're going to set min equal. And then after we go through the whole list, we're going to return min. And then we're going to do the exact same thing for maximum, except we're going to start our max at 0 because we know that we are going to have a value in our score array list that's going to be greater than or equal to 0. So then we're going to go through the list again, but we're going to say if the current score that we're on is greater than max, max equal to score, and then we are going to return max at the end. Do those two methods make sense to everyone? Okay, great. So then what we're going to do is we are just going to add that into our report card method. So we're going to do this dot get min score and this dot get. And that should do it for us. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, great. So now let's go back and check what Lindsay was asking. So I'm going to put in a public method so we can run this. And then let's just create a new student. So we'll call her Lindsay. And then for student, we need a name. And then we also need an array list of scores. So we'll say equals new. And then we'll add 50. 80, 90, 100. I'll just cast all these to double. I could have also just done like 100.0, 90.0. Either would have been fine. Scores. All right, and then, so the method that we wanted to test was delete test score. So then we'll say Lindsay, or and we will test it with 80. And then after we delete that, we don't have a method that prints all of the array list items. So we will say for dot get scores. All right, so we'll run this and we'll see if delete test score for 80 works. Okay, yeah, so that worked. So like I said, when you're making an array list with doubles or integers, so you can see from the description of the class, the double class wraps a value of the primitive type double in an object. So we can still, when we try to use the remove method on an object, since we're using it on a primitive like object, we can just use our parameter to look for that object within the test scores array. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay, great. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if that was a super clear explanation, but basically you can pretty much treat double and integer objects just like their primitive versions in Java. But if you did want to be extra safe, then we could say test score, and then we could do test score at I guess, because if we did get index of, that would be the same issue that we were running into. Because I was going to say to find the object, you could remove finding the index of the object that you were looking for, but then that would pretty much be doing the same thing where you're trying to find the index of this object. So yeah, this will work though. Okay, so does anybody have any other questions about our student class? Okay, well, thank you guys for all coming to tonight's webinar and for asking some really good questions. We hope that this is helpful for all of you, especially now that we are coming closer to the test. And if you guys do have any other questions, then you can always sign up for one-on-one tutoring sessions. The link to that has been sent out in other emails, and I think that Sebin just put that link in the chat. Thank you, Sebin. And yeah, we have in-person meetings coming up soon, so we hope to see you all there. And our next webinar will be this Thursday at 8 p.m. and we will be I think it's at 9 p.m. Yes, this Thursday at 9 p.m. and we'll be doing more AP practice. But we hope you guys all have a good week. See you soon.